Hello, everyone. Welcome back to the Voices of Healing podcast. I'm your host, Tina Clark. Today's guest, Thomas Brown, is going to share a story of how he lost his brother by suicide and then years later decided to take a 7,000-mile bike ride for suicide awareness. And in 2012, he published a book on his bike ride called A Bicycle Odyssey. He is also the podcast host of Inner Monologue. Welcome to the show.
Thank you, Tina. It's amazing to be here. I appreciate the opportunity to speak with you and your audience and share my story.
Yeah, so why don't you walk us into what was going on in 2001 in your life, your brother's life, and your family?
Yeah. Suicide is definitely, suicide is definitely an interesting trauma for anybody to experience. To anybody, like the grief that comes with it is very confusing. Because a lot of times, you're sad because the person is gone, but you could be mad at the person who's gone because of how they died. I didn't really have that kind of experience. And I would say that like my brother's death wasn't something that catapulted me into a depression. I was already there. I was a little bit too soft-headed or just unwilling to use the word depressed. Although I was a very emotional person, I was comfortable emoting. I was comfortable sharing my feelings. It's for some reason, like I've never thought of like, this is how most people feel, right? This is just like early 20s young man angst, it's not depression. But I was still very open and one of the most open of all of my peers when it came to like expressing and sharing emotional feelings. So I was at least one step ahead of them on that way. My biggest thing, and it took me years before I realized it, was that I'm extremely codependent. That was kind of like the cross that I had to bear. So when I lost my brother, him and I we'd kind of been going through some clashes. He was 6 years older than me, and we had difference of opinions on each other's lifestyle. And so that was kind of like a wedge that was between us for a few years. And it wasn't until a few months before he died that we were starting to mend that bridge. But I was never really mad at my brother when he died. I didn't have those feelings like some people could. I was sad. I missed him. I was slightly confused, but not really. My brother he was going through a major depression. I never would have thought that somebody in my life would have taken their own life. But in hindsight, even very early on, like with the day or a couple days after his suicide, like hindsight is 2020. And I was just like, oh, I saw all the tells, but I'd never had that experience before. So
what were some of the signs that you later realized were tells?
He lost a lot of weight. My brother was a womanizer. So a woman broke his heart when he had just graduated from high school. He was, I think like 2 years after high school, he went up to Northern Arizona University, was living with this woman, and the woman broke his heart. I couldn't tell you the story of what happened, if there was any fault, but they broke up and my brother was really sad. And he was like, nope, that's never going to happen to me. I'm never going to allow a woman to make me feel that way ever again. So he just decided to become a womanizer, and he had 2 primary girlfriends. A few years after that breakup, he ended up having 2 primary girlfriends. One was my friend and one was my boss. So that was fun. And that was like kind of like the struggle between, like, I was like, I just didn't want to. It was kind of impressive to see his weave of lies. I didn't respect it. I didn't agree with it, but it was definitely impressive. And the ability that you have when you're good at like weaving, manipulating situations, as my brother was, the ability to use somebody's denial against themselves is profound. um and I just didn't want to be a part of it. And I was, out of high school, I started experimenting with substances, really fell in love with cannabis, and he didn't like that. So I'm like, whatever, like I'm just sitting over here smoking a joint, watching a movie, man, or going on a hike. you're you're emotionally manipulating two women and having other conquests on the side. I'm I'm good with with my karma, brother. you know, and I just didn't want to. It was weird. It was just very, very weird. So the tells were when they finally got smart, the two women finally like got fed up with his BS. They both bounced, and they bounced at the same time. And in order to like sell a lie, there's got to be a part of you that believes the lie. Like you gotta believe it enough to be able to sell it like it's truth. And if you tell a lie long enough and you're really good at like fake believing it to sell it, you're gonna start believing it. And you're gonna start believing the myth that you're creating inside of your head of like how awesome you are or invulnerable you are or amazing you are, when actually you're being a prick. You're being disrespectful. You're taking advantage of people. And so when both the women went away, that illusion was a house of cards, and it came tumbling down, and he freaked out. He became emotionally unstable and super, super, super depressed. He lost a lot of weight. He was too ashamed to be able to tell people that he was sad. He couldn't tell his peers he was sad. Couldn't tell me he was sad, because he was like, he was all charisma and just all full of piss and vinegar and just like amazing and like super, super, super ego. Had no relationship with ego. Ego was driving was the pilot of his avatar. And so he just, when they were gone, he freaked out. And because he couldn't tell people that he was just sad, he had to invent a new story. And the new story was that he was physically sick. And how dare those women leave him when he's physically sick? He told everybody he had cancer. And I'm just like, what? Okay, that's weird. I don't believe that. But I didn't really want to confront him or anything, because we were also just starting to like, because he was heartbroken, I think he was reaching out for the people that he could, family and stuff like that. So him and I started like mending. The thing that I didn't want to be a part of was now gone. Like I just didn't want to be a part of your stories or your lies. I still love you. You're still my brother, but like, don't ask me to lie for you. Just keep me out of it. Like I don't want to be like, I'm just trying to like, I'm a super codependent dude hanging out with toxic people. You know, I had a bunch of passions and dreams, but I was too afraid to start my journey, because I knew that would mean that I had to start on my own, and I just didn't know what that looked like, and I was too terrified to do that. So, yeah, it was very, very, very strange time for my life. And even though I did not have the tools to manage my own mental health, rather than really like managing or processing the grief of my brother's death, I kind of like looked at my parents and I was like, I could never imagine what it's like to lose a child, something that two people came together to create, and it's their firstborn, and he was like the golden child, and like seeing them, like how devastated they were, especially like it was my mom that found my brother. um I wanted to like kind of focus on them. It wasn't like I just didn't have the tools. I didn't have the tools to focus on to manage my own grief. How did I expect that I would manage theirs? I tried to step up to the plate, but like, yeah, it just, made my emotional and mental health issues that I was dealing with my codependency, it just exasperated it.
So when he actually did pass away, you said you weren't surprised because he was kind of in a downward spiral for a while.
Yeah, in hindsight, it's not that I wasn't surprised. It's just that I saw I'll use the term story, the story path of his downfall. And I never lost a friend to suicide. I never knew a family member that killed themselves before. But now that I had this, I was like, well, there's a part of me that was like, okay, I know the signs, and I'm never gonna let anybody cross my path again. Like, that's one thing that I was pretty damn sure of. That now that I know the signs, or that like I've experienced, like, I'm not gonna ever ignore those signs in people that I love. That was, at the very least, was something, because I was a very emotional person and had no problems expressing feelings. I also had no problems asking people and being a space for them to share theirs. And sometimes I did with my buddies that I was hanging out, especially when we were all after the end of the night, and somebody's a little tipsy for whatever reason, their guard is down a little bit, and I can get them to like release some of their, express some of their emotions in a positive way. But like, seeing those signs, like, I just knew, he, like I said, he lost weight. He was crying a lot, hanging out in bed a lot. He was still hanging out with his friends, but there's excessive drinking that was happening too, which was leading to like the emotional outbursts that he was having. So, yeah, just things like that.
Yeah, so obviously this is a life-changing event for you and your family. What did you learn about yourself, and
Well,
how did it change your life?
I mean, going from being the baby of the family to the only child, um, it took about a decade to accept the fact that I was going to be the person that had to take care of mom and dad when they got older. And then once I accepted that, it took about a decade to learn how.
Wow.
I'm a very slow learner. I'm like, on the cover of my book, 2012, A Bicycle Odyssey, there's a turtle, and the story of the turtle comes up a lot in the book. But like, I am very much like, I have a turtle's pace, so I process things slow. I work on things slow. If I rush something, I'm gonna mess it up and then have to start all over again. When I'm at work and I'm doing something, and someone's like, "Do you want to race in this project?" and I'm like, "No, not at all," because I'm gonna have to do twice the work, because I'm gonna mess it up and fumble, and then I'm gonna get mad that I'm like falling behind you. I'm like, no, you go at your pace, I'll go at mine. I'm cool with that. So it's, the first 10-year mark, like about 10 years after my brother died, is when I was organizing the bike ride. So that's when I think the bike ride itself, the organizing it, and then the actual like doing the ride of physically moving my body, 60 miles a day, to having heavy conversations at night with large groups of people, sometimes intimate groups, sometimes large groups of people, about suicide, about mental health, about their experience in losing their loved one. Like, all of that together kind of like forced me to grow up. And it also showed me that I was capable of doing things. I was capable of organizing a large event. I was capable of of inspiring an idea to have other people involved. I was capable of of just being vulnerable. I was capable of holding space for other people. So it just that like that bike ride itself was kind of like the catalyst. I was 34. I turned 34 on the bike ride, I believe, and like it kind of like revealed the man inside of the boy. You know what I mean? Um, the journey to the bike ride, being like super, super codependent, I was in a really toxic relationship with a woman for about 6 or 7 years. The relationship I had with like a few of my peers, my friends, like those were extremely toxic. And um, I wouldn't say that I was a toxic person or they were a toxic person, but together our mixture was volatile. And a few years after my brother died, I realized that I wanted to. There was a creativity in me that wanted to get out, and I needed to change. And I was starting to like wanting to be part of like doing projects and not just like working, going home, smoking weed and watching TV or smoking and going out and stuff like that. Like I didn't really care about like going out. I wanted to be around people, but I didn't really care about like going out and partying. Even though I still did from time to time, but I couldn't do it every single night, and I was just like over it. So in 2006, I not a Christian at all, not a religious person, very like into spirituality and things like that. But my parents' church, they belong to a super progressive church, and as a non-Christian, I like a lot of their values transcended into a secular me. I resonated with a lot of their values, and the minister wanted to walk from Phoenix to Washington, D.C. And there was a filmmaker that was with them, and the minister, knowing that I was into film, that was one thing that him and I had in common. He was like, "Hey, do you want to be the production assistant for this walk and for this documentary?" So not only was it seminary on the road, but it was like film school on the road. And it was the first time I had ever been east of Wichita, Kansas, which is where my family's from. First time I'd ever seen the Mississippi, the first time I'd ever been east of the Mississippi. Um, and that was eye opening. And that walk, like in 2006, is when I kind of like separated part of my codependency from like the guys that I used to hang out with. And I was like, because me and my buddy were all about, we both wanted to be in film. We loved movies, but like he just wasn't motivated to like do the work to get to that point. And so I had to separate from him. But I was still in a very, very toxic relationship when I came back from that. I came back from that walk. I went to film school and was working on a lot of projects, doing a lot of my own projects, and just like being a creative person, loving photography, writing screenplays. And it wasn't until around like 2008 that I realized, okay, now I need to break away from this woman, and I don't know how. Like I'm like addicted to her. I'm like afraid to be alone without her. And she was mean. She was very mean. I felt like I was dating my brother, like with how like manipulative she was, and I was just like hooked. So that's when I like walked into my therapist's office, Kim, and she really introduced me and brought the awareness of awareness to my consciousness. And with like we probably spent, the first day you go in and you kind of like, she goes through a quick history of your life. And then I've seen her twice a week for probably like a month or two, maybe 3 months. And it wasn't even until like the third month that we finally got to the suicide. Like I didn't even realize how much baggage I had inside of me. And so she just taught me self-awareness and the importance of self-awareness. And ever since then, self-awareness to me is like the only game in town. If you don't know who you are, you're going to have an entire world telling you who you should be, what you should aspire to be, how you should look, how you should speak. And so I don't think that was like a big part of like where the bike ride came from. If I hadn't had that experience with Kim, I don't think the bike ride would have ever happened. And it definitely, I don't think it would have happened if I hadn't done that walk across the country with a bunch of Christians. Because I was like, when I'd met my friend Zach, who's my cycling buddy on this journey. I met him like around 2010, 2009, 2010 is when we started hanging out. And he had lost his brother to suicide. So that was the first person I had ever met that was outside of my own experience of suicide, that somebody that had also had that experience, and that he lost his brother too. So we had that connection that was similar. And I like 9 months or 6 months after Zach and I were hanging out, like I feel like things were good. I was dating a new woman. I had this new friend that like I could share this experience that I had like 10 years earlier. But like I was still feeling like there's like this thing inside that like I was having like a little existential crisis. I was like, I need to do something more with my life. I was digging school. I was taking my time with school. It wasn't like I was doing like a full load every single semester. I was taking my time with it and working on a bunch of different projects, always going back and like doing learning new things and new skill sets. But I just knew that there was something that I needed to do. And I felt like, Zach's existence kind of proved that. There was a lot of synchronicities between Zach and I that I was appreciative of. One, he shared the same birthday as my brother. They're both September 7th. We both lost brothers to suicide. We were both reading the same novel series, which the Ishmael series by Daniel Quinn. And Daniel Quinn's story, he's all about like understanding your story, paying attention to like your species story, your planetary story, your national story, your individual story. So it was kind of like a great like narrative tale that promoted self-awareness. And so there's all these things that like came together between Zach and I, that I knew that we were going to do something together other than just like hang out and play basketball and talk about women and drinking some beer. And so 6 months after we had met, I was doing a photography gig at a bar, like photographing an event. And I told him about my journey with the Christians, Crosswalk America in 2006. And he's like, I would totally love to do something like that, but I don't want to walk. Like, I want to ride a bicycle. And so we decided that we would, ride our bikes to honor our brothers. And it took like another 7 months before, it was just an idea. And then in February of 2011, I called them up. I was like, let's make this happen. Let's do this. Let's start meeting like once a week and make this happen. And so we had like 13 to 12 and a half to 13 months to prepare and organize. And 13 months seems like a long time, but like when you're trying to organize something that is going to take 7 months of your time, you're going to travel over 7,000 miles and you're going to meet people and and talk about these heavy experiences. The day that we started, I still wish we had another month to plan. Oh God. And it was just wild. It was wild. It was a long journey just to get to the first day of the cycling tour.
Yeah, so every day you would cycle all day long, and then at night you would meet with groups.
Yeah, we didn't ride
Is that
every
how it was
day.
organized?
I kind of modeled it I modeled it the same way as we did as the walk across the country. So we needed at least 2 days off for recovery for our bodies. So we would ride like 3 days in a row, take a break, ride like 3 days in a row, take a break. And it was stuff like that. And sometimes, when you're heading across the desert and you're in the Southwest, there's not a lot of places to take breaks at. We had some cities that we decided we would take like extra days off. That's why it took us 7 months for two reasons. One, we would take like a week off in like certain towns. that like we just wanted to like explore, or maybe we knew somebody there, so we wanted to like hang out and like have an extra recovery. And then also we didn't do a straight line. We did like a giant W across the country. You know, San Francisco to Los Angeles, back to Phoenix, which is where we were from, and then up to Albuquerque, Taos, Boulder, Colorado, all the way across to Omaha, all the way down to Austin, Houston, and then across the Gulf states, down the peninsula to Sarasota, and then across the peninsula, and then up the eastern seaboard, cutting back inland to Atlanta, and then weaving our way all the way up to upstate New York. So it was a giant double.
Wow.
It was a weird, yeah, it was a weird looking W. Once we had a lot of bravado when we started. The idea was that I was gonna shoot a film, or I was gonna like produce a film about it and interview a lot of people. And so we needed to raise money. In order to do it right, I wanted to raise money to have a support vehicle, just like the walkers did. And then we would hire somebody to drive the support vehicle, and they would be kind of like the production assistant, like I was when I was did the walk, and have somebody do like the support vehicle and shoot all the footage and like get real like real kind of like stuff that was happening between Zach and I on the road. And then like I would interview different people, or Zach would interview different people across the country. I learned really, really early. First of all, we didn't raise money to be able to buy a support vehicle, let alone hire somebody to drive that support vehicle. We raised just enough money to like survive somewhat comfortably for the 7 months. So when we started, we're like, okay, we're just going to ride this whole thing without a support vehicle, and we're not going to have anybody with us, and we're going to be side by side for 7,000 miles. So combined, we're going to, as a team, travel 14,000 miles. And it became very clear that wasn't sustainable. That wasn't going to happen, because if one of us got injured, when you're organizing something like this, like, you're kind of carefree in a way. Like every single day is a new experience. The only thing that is consistent is change. But other people, they have lives to consider. They have schedules that they have to adhere to. So if a crisis center was going to host an event and use our bike ride as a gimmick to inform the public and the press the resources that they have in their town, we need to be there when they have these events. We can't be like, oh, I fell like a couple days ago and busted my knee. Like, we have to stop. So by the time we got back to Phoenix, I just decided, like, I'm going to take my truck. And what we'll do is, like, I'll drive and you ride one day, or one morning, and then we'll rotate in the afternoon, or we'll just go back and forth every day. So, and that was helpful because Zach got injured, and well, first of all, he had an emergency oral surgery he had to do when we got back to Phoenix. So he was out for like a few days, and I did a lot of riding that during that time, and my dad would like travel with me in the truck and then bring me back home at night. And then he needed like a few extra days. So when we finally left Phoenix, he still had to like drive just for a couple of days as his mouth was like fully healed. And then later on, like when we were in New Mexico, I ended up getting like diverticulitis. And like I couldn't ride for 6 days. I couldn't eat like a lot of foods for 6 days. So like my calorie count was like super down. Like I was like drinking kefir and eating white bread and drinking like tea, and that's all I could really consume for like an entire week while I was on while I was on antibiotics. trying to get my stomach to heal, because like every single bump I hit, it felt like a knife was in my stomach. And so that was another time that like I just had to drive and he did all the riding from northern New Mexico all the way up into Colorado. And then on the eastern seaboard around Chapel Hill, North Carolina, he had a back injury and he couldn't ride for a couple states. So he was doing most of the driving. So that's why we needed a support vehicle, because all those incidences where if we didn't have one, we would have been the entire tour. Like it happened like right when we entered the second state on our journey, the entire tour would have been derailed because we had already had all these events planned because we knew we had to schedule everything out before we even left. We had to have an extensive schedule from San Francisco to Los Angeles to Atlanta to New York City. You know what I mean? Like they were planning for us to be there on certain days, so we had to be there no matter what. So yeah, deciding to do it as a team and not side by side the entire way helped us to do that. So
Wow, that sounds like a lot.
yeah, it was there was a lot of planning that went into it. Like we stayed in like we had over about 100 events in 100 different cities, or a couple events in the same city. And I had to cold call hundreds of crisis centers and just tell them about what we were doing and why we were doing it. And the first domino that had to fall was partnering with a crisis center in Phoenix, so that we all not only people, especially when people lost loved ones to suicide, are very kind of like, it was such a taboo thing. It still is, not as much as it was back in 2012 or 2011 when I was making those cold calls, because there were some places that like people were like, they didn't trust us. They didn't know if we were just like trying to exploit people who had lost loved ones to their grief. So having a crisis center that was connected to us, that we could advertise on our website, that was sponsoring us, went a long way.
Does that mean that there are people out there that exploit this, that would exploit it?
I don't know. I've never seen it, but the thing about it, like there were people, for instance, San Francisco is supposed to be like a bastion of progressive and liberal ideas, and very open to to talking about situations like this. The individuals that ran those groups told us like, well, we won't have like, if you want to meet with us for coffee, like you two can meet with the therapists that are the facilitators of the group. We don't want to have an event because a lot of the people that are in our groups, they're not out about being a suicide loss survivor. Like people don't know that they lost a loved one to suicide. So like even in San Francisco, they were like, yeah, we don't want to meet. There was other people that met up with us like the morning that we were leaving, just to like meet us and shake our hand and say thank you. And some of those people were from this organization called the Bridge Rail Foundation, which was to put a net under the Golden Gate Bridge. And then in Albuquerque, there was a gentleman that was like, no, we don't want anything to do with you guys. Like, you're not going to change anything. And this guy wouldn't even allow his group to know that we existed and what we were doing and that we were going to ride through their town. There was another woman that she had a group of people, and like they were just going to meet us for dinner, which was a little bit difficult to like have conversations, because like they picked like the hippest restaurant on the hippest street on like a Saturday night. So it was just like super loud, and like you couldn't really like have like these really heavy, deep conversations because you're like screaming at the person. Oh yeah, I was 24 when my brother died. Like it's just it wasn't like that. But it wasn't the best place for conversations like that. But that happened like maybe 2 or 3 times where we had those like disappointments. it was everywhere else, you know, like the other places, like when we did have events, we would either, you know, meet with a small group at one of their support evenings, like one of their scheduled like support group meetings, and there'd be like 6 of them and then 2 of us, and we'd have these very intimate conversations and a couple hours to just like kind of like share our stories and cry together and listen to each other and hold one another. To like having like events that were like with 500 or 1,000 people in an auxiliary um gymnasium, you know what I mean? And then having like
Wow.
doing a presentation and then having like one-on-one conversations with groups afterwards, you know. So
Hmm.
it was you know, we camped one night. We stayed in a lot of like rundown hotels in the middle of nowhere. We stayed in trailer parks. We stayed in McMansions. Like it was just it was wild. A lot of the people, a lot of strangers like showed up and just offered like the further right down the road we got, like we'd have somebody be like, "Hey, I know somebody in your I noticed that you're passing through this town. I got somebody in such and such. Like if you need a place to stay, they'll take you in for the night." And you just like having like massive trust in the kindness of strangers is also kind of like a part of that, and having to like let go and just know that you're going to be taken care of when you're doing something like that. um
Yeah, and
with-
then for the most part, it shows you that people are good,
yeah,
you know?
yeah,
Most people are good.
one on one, you know, small groups of people are good.
So, you mentioned earlier that it took you like 10 years to figure out you were gonna be the only one taking care of your parents.
It took me 10 years to accept that, like that would like
Yeah.
I you know what I mean, like I just knew that I didn't have my shit together. How am I going to take, I never wanted children. How am I going to take care of like these 2 adults when they get older? My brother demanded control of the household, you know? He's like, "I will take care of everything and blah blah blah. I know better than mom and dad." Like he was just very very loud and would take control of things. And I was never like that. I was much more passive.
Mhm.
um I've kind of adopted that behavior, at least like in taking control of like, all right, I'll get this handled. It's not like I'm gonna you do what I say and this is how we're gonna do it. My partner may disagree with that statement, but I feel like I have a much softer hand than my brother ever did.
Mhm.
And to me it's not like about power. It's about like this needs to be done and this person needs help. That's all it comes down to. It's not about like
Right.
power and having the power. And that's what it kind of like felt like with my brother, like him, you know, the same, whatever part of his personality that he used to manipulate those 2 women for as long as he did. And we're talking like close to a decade. Like it was the same type of power that he used to try to like dominate my parents' household when he was old enough. So, um,
So what would be your advice to a listener who may be suffering from depression or who is impacted by a loss of a loved one to suicide?
I would say first, if you're having like any type of like suicidal ideation, you call or text 988 and get the resources that you need. Um, if you have people in your circle that you trust, that you love, and you know that love and respect you, reach out to them. Don't be afraid. You know, seek out therapy however way that you can. Um, and therapy is kind of like dating. I was lucky that I found the first one right off the bat, but it's kind of like dating. You got to find one that works for you.
Right.
Um, and just know that like the only way out is through. You've got to be able to go through it. You got to be able to go through the darkness. Now, if you're somebody that has a friend who lost a loved one to suicide, this is something we don't really, because like, you know, everybody's there for like the first 2 weeks. And then after the funeral, everybody just bounces, you know, because they have to go back to their
Mhm.
lives. But
Mhm.
if you know somebody who's lost a family member or a friend or a loved one to suicide, the best thing you could do is just be there and listen. They're not going to make sense. And you also have to be comfortable if somebody falls on the ground, gets in a fetal position, and has the ugliest ugly cry you've ever witnessed in your entire life. You got to be cool with that. You got to be able to like be there and hold space for them and witness that and just know that like they're having a moment.
They're
We're
they're
all gonna have a
releasing it, and let them release it, you know.
yeah,
Just be there for them.
yeah, yeah.
So
That's a
what about if someone tells you they're thinking of suicide or they have thoughts of suicide? If you're a friend or loved one, what do we
I
do
would
then?
I would call or text 988. It's the
Okay.
national hotline. It's going to connect you to your local resources, and just get some advice. That's a heavy
Okay.
thing to like. The first thing, you know, you want to listen. You don't want to just be like, I have to help you. You kind of like want to like, you need to be calm in that situation. You know, I know it's
Yeah.
not something that person is already like not feeling good. You going into full panic mode is not going to make them feel safe with you.
Yeah.
And they
I've
felt
had several friends tell me that the only reason why they're here is because of their children.
mhm. Yeah,
That if
that's
it
heavy.
wasn't for their daughter, being that for one friend, if it wasn't for her daughter, she wouldn't want to be here.
Yeah. 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 And that's I mean, that at that point you kind of like, as I said, like don't panic. You can't be the panicky one. They're not going to feel safe. They're not going to come to you next time if they're like you know, if you're if them mentioning where you're at puts you on the ledge when they're already there, they're not going to
Hmm.
trust you to walk them off the ledge. So you got to like remain calm, panic, just talk with them, let them talk, be there with them, listen, but also get those resources as soon as you can by calling or texting 988.
Yeah, good advice. And thank you, Thomas, for coming on and
Thank you,
sharing your
Tina.
story. And it's important to talk about these things. It's difficult to talk about them, but it's real.
Yeah,
You're being real and honest. Be real and honest with your loved ones. And if they're not responding, find somebody who will,
totally. Totally.
right? Don't
Heck
give
yeah.
up. That one person freaks out or doesn't get it or can't help you, keep looking, keep talking, and don't give up. That
Agreed.
would be my message.
Yeah. Yeah.
So, how can people find your book and
It's
contact you,
on
Thomas?
my book 2012, A Bicycle Odyssey. I had a lot of fun writing this book. I love writing now. It's a fun little exercise. It's good for the mind as well. It's a great creative outlet too. If you go to my website risephoenix.org, there's a link to 2012, A Bicycle Odyssey. Right now, it's being sold through Amazon. So if you go to Amazon, if you have an Amazon account, go to just type in 2012, A Bicycle Odyssey book, and you'll see this gold book that kind of looks like a manual for something. and it's a manual for my discovery of self-awareness, not your
Mm,
discovery of self-awareness, but mine. So I hope that you purchase the book and read it, and I hope it inspires you to go deeper within your own life.
all right. Thanks a lot.
Thank you.